Chapter 65. Near the Cemetery of Death in the southern part of the vast and boundless dark forest, there was a surging waterfall that flowed down with a majestic momentum. Below the waterfall was a wide, deep pool, and there was a trickling stream that led in 3 directions at the edge of the pool. The surrounding trees were verdant and lush, and all sorts of strange boulders could be seen everywhere. Fish swam in the clear waters of the pool. Silver water flowed down like the Milky Way and gathered in the pool below, emitting an enormous roar. The torrent of water that flowed down like a long river surged violently, crashing against the rocks below and creating shocking water trails that splashed in all directions. There was a hard round rock in a corner where the waterfall flowed down. A completely naked man sat on top of the rock, his muscles well-proportioned and full of strength. He sat cross-legged on top of the rock, using his body to withstand the violent impact of the falling waterfall. The surging water smashed against his body, emitting loud crackling sounds. His body swayed slightly, and his expression was cold. The veins on his body pulsed, and there seemed to be a faint black light flickering on the surface of his skin. This person was naturally Han Shuo. Ever since he'd arrived at the Cemetery of Death, the first thing he'd done was to digest the fighting aura that the shadow ghost assassin had left in his body. Han Shuo's body had been reborn after his magical yuan had advanced from the solid stage to the open channels stage. Even the appearance of the fighting aura that had entered Han Shuo's body had changed. The fighting aura that had been injected into his body by the assassin at the Boost Merchant Guild had been restrained by the magical yuan at first. Han Shuo had thought that it would be the same as before, and that it would slowly be absorbed by the magical yuan as he did as he pleased. However, reality proved that Han Shuo's judgment was wrong. The fighting aura hadn't been dissolved by the magical yuan this time. Instead, the magical yuan seemed to slowly loosen its restraints on purpose, causing the fighting aura that had entered Han Shuo's body to run amok in Han Shuo's meridians, causing damage to Han Shuo's meridians. Even some of his bones couldn't withstand it and broke. Logically speaking, this should have been a very painful matter, but when Han Shuo was training, he was surprised to discover that the meridians and bones that had been damaged by the fighting aura had changed again after being reforged by the magical yuan. The reforged meridians were much wider and more resilient than before. When the magical yuan flowed through these meridians, the speed became many times faster than other places, and the bones were also much tougher. After understanding all of this, Han Shuo was delighted to discover that if he continued to train at this speed, then according to the principle of breaking down and building up, the speed of training in the level of opening the meridians would be many times faster than normal training. Just as he was lamenting that training in demonic magic was indeed suicidal, Han Shuo happened upon this waterfall. Based on his understanding of the importance of training in demonic magic, Han Shuo suddenly had the idea to use the impact of the waterfall to train in demonic magic. Reality proved that this idea of Han Shuo's was completely correct. As Han Shuo endured the violent impact of the waterfall with his body under the waterfall, he felt the pain caused by the fighting aura running amok in his meridians. At this time, when he was training in demonic magic, the speed at which he progressed was astonishingly fast. The meridians that had been damaged by the fighting aura became incomparably tough and perverse. However, the impact was the greatest at the center of the waterfall. Han Shuo had only given it a try, but he was already dizzy from the enormous impact. He almost fainted after holding on for 3 seconds, and his body was completely unable to sit firmly on the rock. With no other choice, he could only temporarily rely on the less intense waterfall to train in the corners, hoping that when his body became stronger, he would be able to withstand the greatest impact of the waterfall in the center. Just like this, he would catch a fish and roast it when he was hungry, and spend the rest of his time training in demonic magic. After an unknown amount of time, when Han Shuo felt that the fighting aura that the assassin had left in his body had completely disappeared, he suddenly discovered that the speed of training in the opening channels level had slowed down again. It looks like I'll have to think of another way to quickly break through to the opening channels level. Continuing to train so slowly doesn't seem to be the way to go. Han Shuo muttered to himself. His body was like a large, nimble fish as he flew towards the pool of water in the middle of the waterfall. His 2 hands shot out like lightning from within the pool of water, and he caught 2 strange fish. He swam ashore and put on his clothes. Han Shuo took out a fire and started roasting the fish. When Han Shuo had his fill and was about to return to the cemetery of death, he heard a few light footsteps. Han Shuo's senses were becoming more and more acute. He focused his attention and quickly flew towards the source of the sound. Danger lurked in every corner of the dark forest. Not only were there high-level magical beasts and all sorts of strange races, but there were also all sorts of adventurers who came to explore. Han Shuo had even seen a long silver dragon flying through the sky towards the deeper south of the dark forest one day. Dragons were one of the most powerful existences in this world. According to legends, dragons not only had bodies as hard as iron and stone, but they also possessed powerful magic. Among magical beasts, they were a level higher than first-rank magical beasts. They were also the most powerful super-rank magical beasts. Every dragon was incomparably powerful. Often, a place with a dragon meant the appearance of a treasure. Every warrior who slayed a dragon would receive the respect of everyone. Of course, with Han Shuo's current strength, he naturally wouldn't be so stupid as to become some brave warrior who slayed a dragon. However, the appearance of the long silver dragon made Han Shuo realize that there must be an even more terrifying area in the deeper parts of the dark forest. After a while, Han Shuo finally arrived at the scene according to the direction of the sound. After taking in the surrounding scene, Han Shuo couldn't help but reveal a slight smile. He hadn't thought that he'd run into familiar faces here. 10 or so dwarves with thick bodies, long beards tied into braids, and only a meter or so tall, wielded iron hammers, axes, and some or mining shovels in their hands. They were fighting with 30 or so forest troll. 2 dwarves on the ground had already died from long spears. These dwarves' faces were all flushed red. Even though they knew that they were no match for the forest troll, none of them retreated or fled. They stayed where they were and fought the forest troll head-on. By now, Han Shuo was no longer completely ignorant of some of the miraculous races on the profound continent. Dwarves had extraordinary brewing skills and were even more adept at forging weapons. They were conservative and loved alcohol as much as their lives. Their tempers were stubborn and irritable, but once one obtained their friendship, they would become incomparably generous. Seeing these dwarves raise their iron hammers and axes even though they knew that they were no match for the forest troll, shouting and yelling as they fought fearlessly against the forest troll, Han Shuo actually had a bit of a favorable impression of these dwarves. In addition, Han Shuo thought of the 2 fields that dwarves were adept at. Perhaps they would be of some help to him. After only thinking for a moment, Han Shuo suddenly rushed out, the dagger in his hand quickly slashing, and a forest troll immediately fell. When Han Shuo stood in front of these forest troll and dwarves and chanted a magical incantation to summon the little skull, the green face of the forest troll leader became very unsightly. He shouted in fear, "That evil human has brought the demons again. Retreat, retreat." These forest troll were obviously very afraid of the little skull with the 7 bone spurs on his back. When they saw the little skull appear with the bone dagger in hand, they immediately scattered under the summons of the forest troll leader. Mighty warrior, Bennett, thank you for your help. After the forest troll had left, one of the strongest dwarves holding an iron hammer raised his hammer and expressed his thanks to Han Shuo with dwarven etiquette. Don't mention it. I greatly admire your strong fighting spirit. Alright, why did these forest troll attack you? Han Shuo waved his hands and said modestly and politely, "Humph, these greedy bandits don't work for themselves and only think of how to rob others. They wanted us to forge weapons for them for free, so that their robberies would be smoother. We refused their requests, so these despicable bandits continuously harassed us and cruelly killed our family." Bennett huffed and puffed at his beard as he spoke angrily. Nodding, Han Shuo added, "So that's how it is. They also wanted to rob our merchant caravan last time. These damned bandits are despicable, all right. Honored warrior, you've saved us and we would like to repay you with fine wine. Please return to the village with us." Bennett looked at Han Shuo and extended a kind invitation. Chapter 66. Just as Han Shuo rejoiced inwardly and was about to open his mouth to agree, another dwarf suddenly spoke up. Bennett, the village chief said we can't bring humans into the village. Have you forgotten? Benson, but he saved us from the hands of the forest troll villains. Bennett looked at the dwarf and said, I know, but we have to listen to the village chief or we'll be punished. Benson said stubbornly, It's all right. I won't be going. It was nice meeting you guys. I'll be adventuring nearby and maybe I'll run into you guys again. Goodbye. Han Shuo understood that he couldn't be too hasty when interacting with the dwarves. It wasn't something that could be done immediately if he wanted to gain their approval and friendship, so he immediately spoke up with a smile. Dear friend, we're truly very sorry. This is a bag of wine that we brewed. Take it as our repayment. We hope you can forgive us. Bennett helplessly handed the bag of wine to Han Shuo and said apologetically. Han Shuo hoped that they could forge a suitable weapon in return, but he naturally wouldn't express it at this time. Receiving the bag of wine with a smile, Han Shuo humbly expressed his understanding and left with Little Skull. If he could train his magical yuan to the true demon stage, Han Shuo would naturally be able to forge his own magical weapons. But now, if Han Shuo wanted to obtain a suitable weapon, going through the dwarves was indeed a good method. There was a magical treasure called the Demon's Lair Edge. It was a bit longer than a dagger and a bit shorter than a longsword. The two edges were incredibly sharp, and the tip was as sharp as a triangular spike. After activating it using the method of magic control, it could take someone's head as it flew through the air. It was an extremely frightening weapon in the memories that Chu Kanglin had left behind. With Han Shuo's current level of demonic magic, he naturally couldn't refine iron weapons and directly forge the demonic treasure, the Demon's Lair Edge. However, Han Shuo wanted to forge a prototype through the dwarves, and then use his demonic magic to slowly improve it for now. When he found suitable materials and mastered his demonic magic, he could reforge it a few times and display the perfect Demon's Lair Edge. As he thought about the forging of the Demon's Lair Edge, Han Shuo continuously thought about it. He had already decided to win the friendship of these dwarves and help him forge the Demon's Lair Edge. After returning to the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo stopped at an empty space in front of the Black Ravine. The ground was littered with broken bones. Due to the existence of the boundary, the Cemetery of Death never saw the light of day all year round. The sky was shrouded in a thick layer of brown clouds. Han Shuo felt a sense of familiarity here. The dense yin energy here was very suitable for undead creatures. Fallen undead warrior, answer the call of the Dark Messenger and show your existence. As Han Shuo continuously chanted the necromancy summoning incantation of the skeletal warriors, one skeletal warrior after another slowly appeared in front of Han Shuo. Han Shuo waited until there were 5 skeletal warriors in the empty space before he felt that his mental strength was somewhat exhausted. He stopped summoning the skeletal warriors. Although Han Shuo's mental strength had greatly increased, he could only control the movements of 6 skeletal warriors, including Little Skull. After releasing his mental strength, Han Shuo issued an order. The 6 skeletal warriors, including Little Skull, began to move according to Han Shuo's command, gripping the bone daggers in their hands. With Han Shuo's mental manipulation, the skeletal warriors waved their bone daggers, and grotesquely shaped deep pits and ravines gradually formed on the ground. The ravine in the middle was like a long line that connected these deep pits. From a distance, these deep pits that were connected by the ravines looked like a sinister ghost face about 6 meters tall. The deep pits became the nostrils, eyes, and ears of the sinister ghost face, looking a bit sinister and evil. The original demon cave was left behind by Chu Kanglin. It was a kind of formation for cultivating the original demon. When Han Shuo had advanced from the solid realm to the pulse-opening realm, it had suddenly surged into Han Shuo's memories. The original demon cave had to use nether spirits as a foundation. 18 nether spirits were placed into the original demon cave, and through the operation of the formation, they would kill and devour each other. In the end, only the 3 strongest nether spirits would survive. Through the operation and condensation of the original demon cave, the 3 nether spirits could be refined into original demons. The original demon cave had to operate continuously for 36 days. During this time, the original demon cave would constantly absorb the yin qi of heaven and earth. Every day, the refiner would have to drip 6 drops of blood into it and inject demonic yuan into it. When the original demon was formed, it would directly communicate with the refiner's mind and silently invade the opponent's body during battle. Once the original demon entered the enemy's body, it would automatically devour the enemy's essence and blood. In Han Shua's memories, the original demon was known as the demon head of demonic practitioners. According to the different realms, demonic practitioners could refine 4 different levels of demon heads, namely, original demon, yin demon, mystical demon, and spirit demon. Among them, the original demon was the lowest level of demon head, and the refining method was the simplest. All it needed was the yin qi of heaven and earth and the blood of a demonic practitioner to refine it. Of course, it was precisely because of this that a small demon head like the original demon was also the weakest. Many things could harm it. Fire and ice could destroy both its body and soul. Even if it entered the enemy's body, as long as the enemy had a deep amount of true essence or demonic yuan, they could also refine it to death within the body. However, with Han Shua's current level of cultivation, he could only refine a small demon head like the original demon. Not only was Han Shua's realm insufficient, but he also didn't know the method for the time being. On one hand, Han Shua was refining this original demon as a tool for gathering information. On the other hand, if the enemy was invaded by the original demon during battle, it would still be of some help to Han Shua. At the very least, the enemy would have to divide their attention to deal with the original demon. This way, Han Shua would have the opportunity to take advantage of. If the enemy's strength was too low, just the invasion of the original demon would be enough to kill him. When the original demon cave was formed, Han Shua drove the skeletal warriors and cleaned up the original demon cave. Relying on the green ball and the same method as before, he cultivated his mental strength for an entire night. On the second day, Han Shua expended all of his mental strength to summon 18 wraiths and put them into the original demon cave. These wraiths came from a different dimension and belonged to the same type of existence as the dark spirits that Han Shua understood. After learning necromancy magic, Han Shua didn't need to go out and collect these wraiths at all. He only needed a summoning incantation to deal with them. It was truly very convenient. When the 18 wraiths entered the original demon cave, chilly winds suddenly blew in the surroundings. Waves of chilly air gathered from all directions of the cemetery of death into the original demon cave. The density of this kind of chilly air far exceeded Han Shua's expectations. It was only at this moment that Han Shua suddenly remembered that whether it was necromancy magic or the cultivation of demonic yuan, they both walked the path of evil. In 2 different worlds, these 2 methods were both evil cults, and indeed they had many similarities. When the 2 methods were used in tandem, it really did yield twice the results with half the effort, and saved Han Shua a lot of effort. When the original demon cave absorbed enough chilly air, the entire original demon cave, that was manifested in the form of a sinister ghost face, suddenly seemed to come alive. It seemed to be constantly twisting and changing, and clouds of black air seeped out of the 7 orifices of the ghost face. When he saw this scene appear, Han Shua immediately understood that it was just as he'd guessed. Wraiths could completely replace wraiths and become the foundational material for the original demon cave. When Han Shua bit his finger and dripped 6 drops of fresh blood into the original demon cave and infused them with magical yuan, the 18 wraiths abruptly sank into a berserk state. They let out shrill, ghostly cries and began to fight incessantly, falling into a battle for the 6 drops of fresh blood. It's done. We just need to wait for 36 days for the 3 original demons to take form. Han Shua looked at the original demon cave and said with a smile. He turned his head to look at the skeletal warriors beside him, and suddenly discovered that the little skull refined from demonic yuan seemed to be attracted by the original demon cave. Without Han Shua's orders, it stepped into the original demon cave and lay leisurely in a deep pit. It even raised its 2 calf bones, revealing a strange appearance. That strange appearance seemed to be enjoying. Han Shua was dumbstruck as he watched. He released his mental strength and was about to have the little skull rise from the original demon cave when he sensed the little skull's joy in his heart. This startled Han Shua, and he couldn't help but look with a face of astonishment at the little skull lying comfortably in the original demon cave. After staring blankly for a while, Han Shua couldn't understand what was going on. He observed the original demon cave and discovered that it was still operating as usual. Those wraiths were still killing each other inside and didn't seem to be affected at all. Han Shua shook his head and murmured, "The little skull is getting weirder and weirder. Forget it, it doesn't look like it's affecting the operation of the matrix anyways. I'll leave him be." Muttering to himself, Han Shua walked towards the cemetery of death, planning to start studying the beginner magics of necromancy book. He wanted to advance in both fields and make breakthroughs in both at the same time. Chapter 67. For the next few days, Han Shua stayed in the cemetery of death, studying the book, Beginner Magics of Necromancy, while taking care of the original demon cave. Making use of the round green ball that most likely belonged to the cemetery of death, Han Shua would receive a large increase in mental strength every time his head was in severe pain. Except, as the number of times he used the round green ball increased, Han Shua could clearly feel that the rate at which his mental strength increased became slower and slower. It looked like this strange round green ball wouldn't be able to help him continue increasing his mental strength. As the number of times increased, the benefits that Han Shua received became smaller and smaller. On this day, Han Shua meditated for a while and left the cemetery of death after injecting fresh blood and magical yuan into the original demon cave. After patrolling the vicinity where he'd met the dwarves last time, Han Shua discovered traces of a dwarf and followed this dwarf without batting an eyelid. Han Shua finally discovered this dwarf after walking for a while and stopped in front of a hidden cave entrance. There were lush shrubbery near the cave entrance, and it was obvious that the surroundings had been purposefully arranged. If it wasn't for the dwarf moving some large leaves away after arriving here, Han Shua wouldn't have discovered that there was a cave here. After observing the vicinity of the cave entrance, Han Shua discovered that a few dwarves had appeared nearby. They held iron shovels and hammers as they walked into the cave one by one. After a while, Bennett, who'd given Han Shua a bag of fine wine, was supported out of the cave by 2 dwarves. He looked like he'd suffered a bit of injury. A faint sound traveled from afar, and Han Shua's ears were sharp. He could immediately tell that it was the sound of magical creatures approaching. He crouched on the branch of a large tree and waited for a while. Han Shua saw 2 windblade wolves slowly appear in the distance. His thoughts raced. Han Shua broke off a branch from the large tree and threw it towards the shrubs next to the cave entrance. The sound of the branches falling to the ground clearly attracted the windblade wolves. 2 of them moved upon hearing the sound and suddenly changed direction with brisk footsteps, heading towards the entrance of the cave where the dwarves were waiting. By the time Bennett and the other 2 dwarves had heard the commotion and looked around, the 2 windblade wolves had already appeared in their sights. "Oh, damn it, it's a windblade demonic wolf. Let's hurry back to the cave." The injured Bennett couldn't help but grumble when he saw the 2 windblade wolves appear and planned to return to the cave. "Bennett, it's too crowded in the cave. If these 2 windblade wolves follow us into the cave, then they'll be in danger." One of the dwarves waved the hammer in his hand when he heard Bennett's words. Hearing his words, Bennett thought for a moment and said, Then let's kill these 2 damned windblade wolves at the door." "No, the 3 of us won't be able to do it. I think we should have the tribesmen in the cave stop mining and join forces to kill these 2 windblade wolves first," the dwarf said. At this moment, Han Shua suddenly jumped down from the large tree and arched his body from the ground. He dashed out like lightning and nimbly dashed towards the 2 windblade wolves after revealing himself from the distant shrubbery. The dagger in his hand turned into a bolt of cold lightning as it shot towards one of the Windblade wolves. Han Shuo followed up quickly like a cheetah and faced the other Windblade wolf with his bare fists. The two Windblade wolves had been eyeing the three dwarves covetously with their backs to Han Shuo. One of the Windblade wolves had already been stabbed in the back by Han Shuo's dagger. The other Windblade wolf turned around and a wind blade whistled towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo suddenly changed directions in his rapid flight and miraculously dodged the wind blade attack. His body had already rushed in front of the Windblade wolf. The Windblade wolf that had released a wind blade raised its sharp claws and pounced towards Han Shuo when it saw the enemy in front of it. The crossbow bolt in his left sleeve first landed on the two claws of the Windblade wolf that was pouncing towards him. Han Shuo's fist, imbued with the frigid air of the mystical glacial spellfire, had already landed on the Windblade wolf's head amidst the wolf's screech. The Windblade demonic wolf let out a shrill cry. Cold air emanated from its body, and it fell to the ground like a piece of frozen meat. On the other side, the two dwarves suddenly threw out the axes in their hands and smashed them towards the other Windblade wolf. However, the two dwarves' strength was obviously inferior to Han Shuo's, and the speed at which they threw their axes wasn't too fast. The already injured Windblade wolf was actually able to dodge them. However, while it could dodge the two dwarves' axes, it couldn't dodge the crossbow bolt that Han Shuo had shot at close range. In the end, the Windblade wolf was unable to escape and fell down powerlessly. "Oh, heroic friend, you've saved Bennett again. How can I thank you?" The injured Bennett couldn't help but cry out in surprise when he saw Han Shuo finish off the two Windblade wolves. Han Shuo only stopped after he'd expertly taken away the two Windblade wolves' cores and furs. He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't thank me. These two Windblade wolves were my prey to begin with. I didn't help you, but it was your two friends who helped me with their axes. You're too polite. Don't you want the bodies of the wolves?" One of the dwarves looked at Han Shuo with surprise when he saw that Han Shuo had taken away the cores and furs of the Windblade wolves, but hadn't cared about the bodies at all. "Yes, I only need the cores and furs of the Windblade wolves. That's the only way I can sell them for a good price." "Then, dear friend, can you give us the bodies of the Windblade wolves?" "Of course I can, but what do you want the bodies of the Windblade wolves for? They don't have much value." "The bodies of the Windblade wolves can be cooked into food." Bennett looked oddly at Han Shuo and explained, "To us, the meat of the Windblade wolves is an extremely delicious type of meat." Han Shuo had eaten the meat of the Windblade wolves before and felt that it was a bit dry and hard to chew. It didn't seem to be a delicious type of meat. He hadn't thought that these dwarves would be interested in it. Han Shuo felt that it was a bit odd when he heard Bennett say this. However, dwarves weren't humans, and perhaps their habits were different. Han Shuo thought to himself. "Right, what are you doing here?" Han Shuo asked. "This is a mine that we discovered. There are some copper and iron ores inside, but the inside often collapses. The large rocks inside the mine will fall down and it's very difficult and dangerous to mine. Quite a few of our tribesmen have been injured, and another tribesman was crushed to death a few days ago. I was accidentally hit by a rock just now and had no choice but to retreat." Bennett seemed to be quite fond of Han Shuo and didn't even hesitate before revealing the secret that the dwarves were keeping. The other two dwarves had wanted to stop Bennett, but didn't even have the time to speak when they discovered that Bennett had already finished speaking. They couldn't help but blow at their beards and glare at Bennett, as if reprimanding him for speaking without thought. "So that's how it is. If you don't mind, I can help you mine the mine. I think that with my help, you'll be in much less danger." A thought struck Han Shuo and he suggested with a smile. "No, it's too dangerous inside. You'll be crushed by rocks if you go in. If you encounter a large area of collapse, there'll be no way to walk out and you'll be trapped until you die." Bennett reminded kindly. "Don't worry, I won't do it myself. I'm a necromancer and can summon necromancers to help you mine the mine. There won't be any problems." Han Shuo said with a smile. "If that's the case, then I'll go in and discuss it with them and see if they agree." Bennett thought for a moment and said this, allowing the two dwarves to support him as they re-entered the mine. After a while, one of the dwarves walked out and said politely to Han Shuo, "Honored friend, we're willing to share the secrets of this mine with you. Please come in and mine this mine with us." Delighted, Han Shuo said humbly, "Thank you for your trust, I'm very happy to work with you." After saying this, the dwarf first dragged the bodies of the two windblade wolves into the mine and then covered the entrance with leaves with Han Shuo. Finally, he led Han Shuo into the mine. Chapter 68. The inside of the mine was even narrower than Han Shuo had imagined. The dwarves were on the shorter side and could walk freely within, but it was a bit inconvenient for Han Shuo. Even with the illumination of oil lamps along the way, the inside of the mine still appeared quite dim. After walking for a few minutes, Han Shuo had no choice but to bend his body. The deeper he walked, the darker and more damp it became. Broken rocks could be seen everywhere on the ground, and the three dwarves finally stopped when Han Shuo discovered that it was difficult to walk with his body bent. The dwarves in front of him were mining with iron shovels and hammers in their hands, and the sounds of hammering rang out incessantly. When they discovered that Han Shuo had walked in, they involuntarily stopped what they were doing and looked at Han Shuo with suspicious gazes. After passing through these narrow passes, the tunnel will become more and more spacious as we go forward. Although there are more iron and copper ores inside, rocks will fall from the top when we move them. There was even a collapse a few days ago. We spent a lot of effort to reconnect the tunnel. Bennett leaned against the hard rock wall tiredly and looked at Han Shuo as he explained. Nodding, Han Shuo said, "All right, make some space for me. I'm going to summon the skeletal warriors and have them mine the ore inside." Following Han Shuo's instructions, the dwarves in the innermost part of the tunnel all retreated out of there. When there weren't any dwarves left inside, Han Shuo chanted a necromancy incantation and 7 skeletal warriors appeared one after another in the tunnel, directly blocking the entrance. Han Shuo had originally only been able to control 6 skeletal warriors, but after meditating with the green ball these past few days, his mental strength had clearly improved once again. He could now control 7 skeletal warriors. "Put your iron shovels and hammers on the ground. I'll have the skeletal warriors use your tools and mine the ore in the innermost part." Han Shuo looked at the dwarves retreating after the 7 skeletal warriors had appeared. When the dwarves heard Han Shuo's words, they hesitated for a moment and threw out the mining tools in their hands one by one under Bennett's persuasion. Han Shuo manipulated the skeletal warriors to abandon the bone daggers in their hands and pick up the mining tools on the ground. Each of them bent their bodies and slowly walked deeper into the mine. A wraith was released and floated into the depths of the mine along with the skeletal warriors on Han Shuo's orders. Han Shuo could observe the surroundings with the help of this wraith. With the wraith leading the way at the front, Han Shuo could personally observe the scene in the depths of the mine. Indeed, it was as the dwarves had said. The skeletal warriors crouched down and slowly made their way through an extremely narrow hole. The further they went, the larger the space became. However, there were no lighting devices inside, and Han Shuo was unable to see his surroundings clearly. When the wraith and the skeletal warriors had walked a great distance and Han Shuo felt that he couldn't control these dark creatures any further, he couldn't help but assign the task of mining ore. Using the wraith as a visual medium, Han Shuo focused his mental strength and manipulated the 7 skeletal warriors to start hammering away at some of the ore in the surroundings. Following the movements of the skeletal warriors, loud clinking sounds came from within. After a while, Han Shuo could clearly feel with the help of the wraith that the rocks at the top of the mine had loosened due to the skeletal warriors digging. After a while, a few large rocks actually fell down and smashed a skeletal warrior into a pile of broken bones. Focusing his mental strength, Han Shuo closed his eyes and stood in front of the dwarves. He carefully manipulated the skeletal warriors and had the wraith float above the top of the cave. He carefully observed the large rocks that had loosened and hurriedly ordered the skeletal warriors below to take cover as soon as the rocks fell. After a long while, another skeletal warrior was smashed to pieces by a large rock. Han Shuo's mental strength was severely depleted and he felt a bit dizzy. He immediately understood that he'd expended too much mental strength and hurriedly ordered the remaining 5 skeletal warriors to stop mining. They picked up some of the crushed ore on the ground and started moving it to the back. When the 5 skeletal warriors moved the mined ore to the narrow pass one by one, the dwarves on Bennett's side called out and didn't wait for Han Shua's orders. They walked to the pass one by one and picked up the ore there, moving it to the safety of Han Shua's side. After a few more minutes, Han Shua felt that his mental strength could no longer support the skeletal warriors' continued work. He immediately made the decision to cast an incantation and send the remaining skeletal warriors, as well as the wraith, back to the other dimension. By this time, the cave entrance in front of Han Shua was already filled with dozens of large and small pieces of ore. The dwarves cheered as they fought to crush the ore and put it into the large pockets on their backs. "Oh, my dear friend. Because of your help, we've harvested more ore today than we've harvested in a week. These cute iron and steel ores can be refined into beautiful weapons. This is truly a happy thing." Although Bennett was injured and very tired, he was in exceptionally good spirits. He looked at his companions as they smashed and picked up the ores in high spirits, excitedly expressing their gratitude to Han Shua. The other dwarves laughed heartily as they picked up the ore excitedly and took out the wine they brought with them. They gulped it down happily and made hearty noises. "Oh my gosh, what's this, what's this?" Suddenly, one of the dwarves screeched loudly. This scream attracted the attention of all the other dwarves, and they all surged towards this dwarf. Han Shua was also startled and couldn't help but look at this dwarf. However, he'd already been surrounded by the other dwarves and Han Shua couldn't see anything. He secretly wondered if something had happened. Just as Han Shua was guessing suspiciously, Bennett suddenly lost his composure and laughed wildly. He even threw the wineskin in his hands into the air, waving his arms and legs as he cheered excitedly, "Black iron, damned black iron. I'm sure this really is black iron. My gosh, there's black iron in there. The village chief will go crazy if he finds out." When the other dwarves heard Bennett's words, their faces all flushed red and they couldn't help but dance with joy. They raised their hammers and furiously pounded the surrounding stone walls, making loud booms and giving Han Shua quite a fright. Han Shua breathed a sigh of relief in his heart when he heard Bennett's words. He understood that these dwarves must have obtained some wondrous metal, which was why they were so excited. He was also secretly happy. The dwarves finally calmed down after a while. Han Shua finally asked, "Bennett, what kind of ore is this black iron? Is it very precious?" Bennett nodded like a chick pecking at rice and said excitedly, "Of course, it's very precious, precious to the extreme. Black iron is the densest and hardest of all ores, but its mass is the smallest of all metals. In addition, it never rusts and can be changed by adding other materials. It's the best material for making weapons. This is a gift from the gods." Han Shua was about to say some words of congratulations when a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through his mind. A piece of memory surged into his mind, and he abruptly understood from the attributes of this black iron that this black iron was actually a precious material for forging demonic treasures in Chu Kanglin's memories, dark steel. Although black iron and dark steel had different names, according to Bennett's description and Chu Kanglin's memories, Han Shua immediately understood that these two ores with different names should refer to the same thing. The black iron that Bennett spoke of was also the dark steel that Chu Kanglin had spoken of in his memories. It's a pity that there's only a very small piece. It looks like it's only enough to forge a small dagger. After his excitement, Bennett looked at the black iron in the dwarf's hands and said with some regret, "Bennett, don't be too discouraged. There's definitely more black iron in there. Maybe we'll be able to get a bigger piece next time. That way we can forge the sharpest weapons." The dwarf Benson said, "Dear friend, thank you very much for your help. We're willing to share our mine with you. Can you continue to help us?" "We're willing to share the ores we mine with you." Bennett looked at Han Shua with a face full of longing when he heard Benson's words, and said pleadingly, "I'm very happy that you trust me so much. I'm happy to help you, but I'm too tired today and want to rest for the night. I'll come back tomorrow to continue mining with you, all right?" Han Shuo was secretly delighted as he spoke humbly to Bennett. Of course. We'll come over with the village chief first thing tomorrow morning. I hope you can come again, Bennett said hastily. Nodding, Han Shuo smiled faintly. Then, see you tomorrow. Han Shuo didn't take a single piece of or with him after he'd spoken and walked confidently towards the entrance of the mine, leaving behind a few wildly excited dwarves gulping down wine. Chapter 69. When he'd exhausted his mental strength, the progress he made when he meditated again was noticeably faster than under normal circumstances. When Han Shuo returned to the cemetery of death and his mental strength was once again full after a night of meditation, Han Shuo came to this conclusion. However, to a necromancer without mental strength, they wouldn't be able to release any magic. This would undoubtedly put them in a very disadvantageous situation. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no necromancer would use up all of their mental strength in one go. Since the dwarves were willing to share the mine, Han Shuo couldn't help but have other thoughts. The iron and copper ores in the mine seemed to be extremely large. With the dwarves' working speed, it would take a very long time to excavate all of them. For Han Shuo, he could absolutely use his summoned creatures to speed up the mining process. If these copper and iron ores were transported to the Empire, Han Shuo would be able to earn handsomely for himself. According to Han Shuo's understanding and the dwarves' behavior, Han Shuo understood that these black iron ores would be very valuable resources. They might be able to sell for an astronomical price. There should be many dwarf villages within the dark forest. This batch of dwarves didn't look like there were too many of them. They probably wouldn't need that much iron and copper ores even if they all added up. Since this was the case, Han Shuo had other plans in his heart. After infusing the original demon cave with fresh blood and magical yuan, Han Shuo left the cemetery of death early in the morning and hurried in the direction of the mine. Han Shuo had thought that he was early enough, but when Han Shuo arrived at the entrance to the mine, he discovered that the dwarves had already arrived. The dwarves were twice as many as usual today. They seemed to have been excited the entire night, and all of their eyes were red, but their expressions were quite excited. One of the dwarves, with a grizzled beard and a bent body and a walking stick, was giving instructions to the other dwarves with a solemn expression. The group of dwarves, including Bennett, all listened respectfully to his instructions. Purposefully making footsteps to attract the dwarves' attention, Bennett immediately raised the iron hammer in his hand and yelled when he saw Han Shuo appear, "Hey, dear friend, we've been waiting for you for a long time." When Han Shuo arrived, the old dwarf with a grizzled beard bowed in human etiquette to greet Han Shuo, saying amiably, "Brave and powerful friend, many thanks for your help. I am Calvin, chief of this dwarf village, pleased to meet you. My name is Han Shuo. I'm honored to have your trust." This place was far from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, and no one knew his identity. Therefore, Han Shuo used his real name to negotiate with these dwarves. "Brave Han, your name is amazing. I've never heard of anyone using such a name. Heh, the children all say that you're a trustworthy person. Our village is willing to share the secrets of the mine with you. I hope we can live in harmony in the future." Calvin first looked a bit oddly at Han Shuo, seeming to be a bit puzzled by Han Shuo's name. However, a smile soon spread across his face and he spoke with a smile. "Then I think we can begin our work." Although Calvin was neither in a hurry nor too slow, the other dwarves all looked at the mine behind them, obviously revealing their impatient thoughts. Han Shuo didn't say much and directly stated his request for work. "No rush." Calvin thought for a moment and stared at Han Shuo. "Han, why are you helping us so much? We're willing to share this mine with you. Why didn't you take half of the iron and copper ores with you yesterday?" Older people thought more than others, all right, and the dwarves were no exception. Han Shuo looked at Calvin and mused for a moment, explaining, "First of all, I have a grudge against the forest troll. Add to that the fact that I was won over by Bennett and the others' fearless fighting spirit. That's why I helped them. Later on, they were the ones who helped me with the Windblade Wolves. Those 2 Windblade Wolves were originally my prey, and it was very easy for me to help you mine the ores. I don't know how to forge weapons, so these iron and copper ores are useless to me. That's why I didn't take them with me when I left. Elder Calvin, I hope you can believe me. Nodding, Calvin bowed to Han Shuo and said humbly, Apologies, Han. I'm older and have seen too many cunning humans. That's why I didn't take it to heart. Nodding, Calvin bowed to Han Shuo and said modestly, My apologies, Han. I'm older and have seen too many cunning humans. That's why I asked out of turn. I hope you don't mind. You're doing the right thing. I completely understand your concerns. It'll be difficult for us to mine the deeper parts of these mines with just us. Since we're willing to share the secret with you, we're willing to share everything in there with you, including the black iron ore bestowed by the gods. We're willing to share everything equally with you. I hope you won't refuse, otherwise we'll truly be embarrassed. Calvin thought for a moment and solemnly made his promise. When Han Shuo heard these words, he sighed inwardly. Although the dwarves were stubborn and hot-tempered, they were a race worth befriending. Han Shuo was a bit ashamed of his own ulterior motives after Calvin's promise. He mused for a moment. Don't worry, Elder, I completely agree to your suggestion. In addition, if I have enough black iron ore, I beg you to forge a weapon for me. Is that possible? No problem. Don't worry, if we have enough black iron ore, I'll personally supervise them and forge a suitable weapon for you. Calvin promised with a smile. Alright, I think we can start working. Han Shuo finally set his mind at ease at this moment and sighed inwardly that the demon's lair edge had finally been secured. He smiled faintly and walked into the mine with the dwarves. After half a day of digging, Han Shuo's mental strength was once again exhausted and he retreated, weary and exhausted. His gains this time were even more abundant than yesterday's. Apart from large amounts of iron and copper ore, he'd obtained another 2 pieces of black iron ore, one large and one small. Han Shuo generously gave the large piece to the dwarf village chief and only threw the small piece into his space ring. At the entrance of the mine, the dwarves were all smiles as they carried the copper and iron ores on their backs, planning on carrying today's gains back to the village. Dear Han, what kind of weapon do you need forged? Calvin asked Han Shuo before he left. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo took out his dagger and drew a blueprint of the demon's lair edge on the ground. He pointed at the weapon on the ground and explained to Calvin, This is the weapon. I want the best and sharpest one. Do you think it'll be possible? Calvin squinted his eyes and bent down, staring at the blueprint of the demon's lair edge and observing it for a while. He said thoughtfully, I've never seen the shape of this weapon before. It looks quite interesting and I think forging it shouldn't be a problem. However, if you want the best and sharpest one, you'll need some rare materials. Our village doesn't have enough of them. A thought struck Han Shuo as he thought of the buzzed merchant guild. It looked like he'd have to throw caution to the wind for the sake of this demon's lair edge. He couldn't help but say, What other materials do you need? Elder can tell me and I'll think of a way to gather the rare materials. I need an extremely good weapon. Do you have pen and paper? Of course. Han Shuo took out the pen and paper he'd prepared before coming to the cemetery of death from his space ring and handed them to Calvin, saying, Elder, don't worry about the lack of materials. I'll think of a way to gather the materials as soon as possible. All right then. Calvin nodded and began to jot down a row of rare materials on the paper. He finally handed it to Han Shuo, saying, Han, as long as these materials can be gathered, I promise to forge an incomparably sharp weapon for you. When I have enough black iron ore to forge this weapon, I'll think of a way to gather these materials. I'll come back earlier tomorrow to mine the ore. Han Shuo left the mine after saying this. Han Shuo continued to mine the mine with the dwarves for the next 10 days. When Han Shuo had gathered enough black iron ore and the dwarves had all reaped a bountiful harvest, Calvin suggested that they temporarily stop mining the ore and start refining the ore into weapons. They'd come back to mine the ore when they didn't have enough weapons in the future. During this time, Han Shuo had already gained the dwarves' trust and accepted Calvin's invitation to go to their village to drink and celebrate. He also knew the correct way to their residences. Early this morning, after Han Shuo infused fresh blood and magical yuan into the original demon cave, In the Cemetery of Death, he directly used the transportation matrix to leave the Cemetery of Death. Chapter 70. Through the transportation matrix, Han Shuo appeared directly at the hidden tomb in the mountain behind the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, in the blind corner that Han Shuo had dug up. Putting away the 6 magical sticks, Han Shuo removed the stone slab placed at the entrance of the tomb and walked out. The sky was only just beginning to brighten. Han Shuo didn't walk from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, but instead took a detour and headed directly for the northern street according to the location on Fabian's card. There were many luxurious and tall buildings in the northern district of Asan City. Many of the empire's nobles and celebrities resided within. The number of city guards here was also the highest. There were already many armored and armed city guards patrolling the area early in the morning. Han Shuo straightened his clothes and wiped off the dust that had just landed on him. Only then did he head for the northern street according to the records on Fabian's card. After a while, Han Shuo stopped in front of a building. There were no guards in front of the door, and it didn't look as eye-catching as the surrounding buildings. Han Shuo arrived in front of the door and focused his attention to observe his surroundings. He only began to knock when he discovered that no one seemed to be paying attention to him. Last time at the Buzzed Merchant Guild, Phoebe had forcefully pushed the death of the shadow ghost assassin onto him. The expression on Grover's face before he left already indicated that this person harbored a grudge. According to Phoebe, whether it was Shadow Ghost or Grover, they both had experts in their hands that could kill him. Therefore, Han Shuo had no choice but to be careful on his return to the Empire this time, afraid of attracting the attention of either Shadow Ghost or Grover. After a while, a gentle-looking butler opened the door and looked at Han Shuo. He bowed with a smile and asked, "Good morning, sir. May I ask who you are looking for?" "I'm Brian. I've come to discuss a business deal with Fabian." Han Shuo responded just as politely. "So it's Mr. Brian. I've heard Fabian mention you before. Please come with me." The butler immediately moved aside when he heard Han Shuo's name, indicating for Han Shuo to enter. When Han Shuo walked in, the butler stuck his head out and carefully observed the entrance before hurriedly closing the door and leading Han Shuo inside, appearing to be very cautious. The buildings inside were still very ordinary. Compared to the Buzzed Merchant Guild's extravagance, this place didn't seem very eye-catching, and the size of the buildings was far less vast. After walking for only a minute, the butler brought Han Shuo into a large hall and called over an ordinary-looking maid. After serving tea and snacks, she said, "Mr. Brian, please wait a moment. I'll go call Fabian for you right away." After the butler left, the maid filled Han Shuo's cup with tea and also left the hall. After a while, the fat Fabian walked in from outside the hall, laughing heartily. Bright and hearty laughter sounded from Fabian's mouth, but his face was a bit haggard and his spirits weren't too good. It seemed that he hadn't been very comfortable recently. "Oh, it's Brian. It's great to see that you're safe and sound." Fabian pulled out a chair and sat down after entering, laughing heartily. "I'm also very happy to see that you're fine. I went into hiding after leaving the Buzzed Merchant Guild last time. Neither Shadow Ghost nor Grover's men will be able to find me, so you don't need to worry about me at all. It's you, on the other hand, that doesn't seem to be doing too well." Han Shuo sized up Fabian and said slowly, "Don't mention it. Grover is becoming more and more domineering now, and our days have indeed been a bit rough lately. All right, what business do you have to discuss with me this time?" Fabian sighed and said a bit helplessly. Han Shuo didn't want to pay attention to the grudge between them and Grover. Fabian wasn't willing to go into detail with Han Shuo's intentions. He thought for a moment and said, "I've come to find you this time not to sell any goods, but to purchase some rare materials from you." "Oh, what rare materials? Take a look at this list. I need all of the materials in here. How much do you think it will cost?" Han Shuo handed over the list of materials that the dwarf village chief, Calvin, had listed to Fabian and said. Fabian took the list from Han Shuo and looked over it carefully. He thought for a moment and said to Han Shuo, "Brian, even I'm not too sure about some of the materials in here. I'm afraid I can't make the decision. If you don't mind, I'd like to have our Miss Phoebe speak with you. Han Shuo stared blankly. Could it be that Calvin's list of materials required items that were extremely valuable? Musing for a moment, Han Shuo nodded and said, "All right, the same goes for Miss Phoebe. I have an urgent need for these items. When can I see her?" "Our miss is here right now. I'll go ask for her instructions right now." "Wait a moment." Fabian rose and said to Han Shuo before leaving the hall. After a while, Phoebe walked into the hall with Fabian with a cold expression on her face. She was dressed simply, but it was hard to conceal her stunning features. Phoebe swept her eyes over Han Shuo as if nothing had happened when she walked in, making Han Shuo feel a bit baffled. Finding a chair to sit on, Phoebe took a long look at the list that Han Shuo had listed. Her brow furrowed slightly as she lifted her head to look at Han Shuo, saying, "These materials should be used to forge weapons. Some of the items in here are indeed quite rare. You found the right person to purchase them from us." Joy welled up in his heart, but there wasn't any expression of happiness on his face. Han Shuo's right index finger drummed on the table every now and then as he said faintly, "Name your price." Nodding, Phoebe's wise and farsighted eyes flashed craftily for a moment as a beautiful curve appeared at the corners of her lips. She said, "Apart from the black gold, or we can sell the rest to you. Especially since you helped us last time, I can even give you a discount. We'll only charge you a total of 3,500 gold coins. The price is absolutely fair." 3,500 gold coins. Han Shuo's heart jumped. He hadn't thought that the 10 or so rare materials that Calvin had listed would be worth so much, and judging from Phoebe's words, this price was already quite low. The black gold or seemed to be a bit troublesome. Frowning slightly, Han Shuo thought for a moment and said, 3,500 gold coins isn't a problem, but as for the black gold, or could it be that your merchant guild can't get it? Black gold or is the same as black iron and is the best material for forging weapons. The price of this or is beyond your imagination. A piece of black gold or the size of a fingernail can be sold for 5,000 gold coins on the black market. Under normal circumstances, black gold ore and black iron ore are both priceless. I have a piece of black gold ore the size of a thumb in my hand, but this piece of black gold ore was obtained with great difficulty. I plan on gathering enough materials to forge the best sword for my master, so I've kept it. Although this piece of black gold ore meets your requirements, I won't sell it to you no matter how high a price you offer." Phoebe's face was solemn as she spoke firmly to Han Shuo. Phoebe was already a swordmaster, and Han Shuo didn't even need to think with his toes to imagine what level her master was at. The sword used by this kind of person would naturally be the sharpest and most extraordinary. Phoebe had reached the level of a swordmaster at such a young age, so she definitely wasn't someone that an ordinary academy of magic and force could teach. It looked like this Phoebe was quite mysterious indeed. However, Han Shuo really needed the black gold ore. He wanted to make the Demon's Lair edge the best it could be and naturally needed the rarest and most complete materials. If he was missing such a precious piece of black gold ore, then the quality of the Demon's Lair edge would be greatly reduced. This was something that Han Shuo didn't want to see. His brow furrowed deeply. Han Shuo thought hard for a while and finally asked Phoebe, "Apart from you, who else has this kind of black gold ore?" "Don't even think about it. I think that even if someone has it, they'll treasure it like a treasure and won't sell it to you." Phoebe looked at Han Shuo's anxious expression with interest, and a faint smile appeared at the corners of her mouth as she spoke with a bit of pride. Han Shuo couldn't help but feel a wave of dejection when he heard these words. As he shook his head and sighed, he suddenly noticed the unintentional smile on Phoebe's lips. His thoughts spun rapidly and Han Shuo thought silently for a while. Finally, he stared fixedly at Phoebe and asked lowly, "Miss Phoebe, as long as you're willing to give me the black gold ore in your possession, you can raise any conditions." Phoebe started and looked at Han Shuo with surprise. She then furrowed her brow and pretended to think for a moment. Finally, she said a bit reluctantly, "Since you helped us last time, I can bear the pain and part with what I love, but you must help me with something else?" "What is it?" Han Shuo thought to himself that Phoebe had indeed planned this beforehand. He was angry in his heart, but didn't show it on his face as he responded with a darkened face. Act with me and help me kill Grover's two most loyal dogs. Darnell and Yuna, these two bitches who should be hacked into 1,000 pieces. Phoebe's face was frosty as she spoke through gritted teeth. What are their strengths? Han Shua asked with a calm face. Darnell is a senior swordsman and has the possibility of breaking through to the level of a swordmaster. Yuna is a fire adept mage, and her strength is equally frightening. These two are a shameless and licentious couple and won't be apart for long periods of time. They're currently living in the Buzzed Merchant Guild. As long as you're willing to help me, I have a 60% chance of silently assassinating them. Phoebe's body suddenly straightened, the twin peaks in front of her chest appearing exceedingly high as she spoke with a bit of excitement. I agree. Han Shua didn't hesitate and said lowly. Chapter 71. Han Shua and Phoebe had prepared for the entire day and took advantage of the evening to board a carriage from the north of the city to the south of the city where the Buzzed Merchant Guild was. Han Shua and Phoebe sat shoulder to shoulder within the carriage. In front of the two of them were two simple crossbows with intricate carvings and a dagger that gleamed with a cold light. This crossbow and dagger are much better than the ones you took from the Orc-Wolf riders last time. I'm giving them all to you for free. Phoebe held a clean silk ribbon in her hand and carefully wiped the long sword in her hand as she spoke coldly to Han Shua. The crossbow and dagger were held in Han Shua's hands and he couldn't bear to part with them. Han Shua was quite satisfied with Phoebe's generosity and said with a light smile, "Don't count on me too much for this time's assassination. My strength isn't as strong as you think. I'll mainly help you keep watch and act as your assistant. You'll still have to do most of the work." Got it. Just listen to my instructions later and I'll tell you what to do. Phoebe rolled her eyes at Han Shua and said a bit angrily. Taking out a small bottle from his space ring, Han Shua carefully poured some powder onto his fingertips and very cautiously smeared it on the tips of the dagger and crossbow bolts. He then hurriedly wiped his fingertips that had just been coated with the powder clean. Phoebe was a bit curious about Han Shua's actions and moved slightly closer to Han Shua. She stared at Han Shua's actions and observed him for a while before opening her mouth to ask in confusion, "What are you doing?" A wisp of orchid-like fragrance drifted into Han Shua's nose and mouth as Phoebe drew closer. Han Shua couldn't help but glance at Phoebe as his heart fluttered for no reason. Phoebe was wearing the same tight-fitting black night clothes as Han Shua today. The tight night clothes revealed Phoebe's beautiful figure without a doubt. She had a finely sculpted face and a stunning beauty blossomed from her bright eyes, causing Han Shua's heart to run wild as he looked at her. I already have Fanny. Although this Phoebe is beautiful, her personality is too cold, and there are too many troublesome and dangerous things on her. Han Shua silently said to himself and then turned his head away, continuing to focus on cleaning his dagger and crossbow bolts. He replied faintly, "Nothing much, just rub some poison powder on." Despicable, shameless, this is against the laws of the Empire. If someone were to find out, you'd be in big trouble. Phoebe said coldly with a face full of disdain. It doesn't matter. What we're doing today isn't honorable anyway, so no one will know about it. Heh, you're my accomplice, so I don't think you'd slap yourself in the face. Han Shua laughed lowly and said with a bit of pride. When Han Shua said this, Phoebe couldn't help but feel angry. However, she had a favor to ask, so she only snorted coldly and didn't say anything. After Han Shua had applied poison powder to the crossbow bolts and dagger, Han Shua thought for a moment and pulled out a few sharp steel needles from his thigh. He was very patient, applying poison powder to these needles as well. Phoebe snorted lightly again when she saw this, seeming to despise Han Shua's actions greatly. When everything was done, Han Shua put away all his weapons and finally looked at Phoebe, saying, "Oh right, why didn't you directly make a move against Grover and instead went to kill two lackeys who wouldn't be of much use? Grover holds some key items of the guild in his hands. He's placed these items in the hands of one of his trusted mistresses. If Grover dies, his mistress will certainly publicize these items. This will be a devastating blow to our guild, So before I kill Grover, I must first find his mistress and grasp these items in my hands. Phoebe flicked a glance at Han Shuo and explained a bit unwillingly. The larger the guild, the more shady transactions there were. For example, when Han Shuo had plundered the Orc Wolf Rider's resources last time, those items should have originally belonged to the shops in the town of Droll. The Empire had long since made it clear that citizens had to hand over these resources if they obtained them. Fabian and Han Shuo's transactions were already considered a violation of the Empire's laws. If the Empire knew of the Boost Merchant Guild's actions, the guild would be hard-pressed to escape punishment. For a guild like the Boost Merchant Guild, there were certainly many more similar illegal transactions. It looked like these important items were in Grover's hands. No wonder Phoebe didn't dare make a move against Grover lightly. The two of them discussed some details in low voices when the carriage suddenly came to a stop. The coachman said softly from the front, "Miss, we've arrived at the back door of the guild. Let's go." Phoebe looked at Han Shuo and dismounted first. Han Shuo stuck his head out and looked left and right before dismounting as well. "Miss, come in quickly and be careful. Grover has just left the Boost Merchant Guild with a few experts. We don't know where they've gone, but they'll usually return at night." An old man from the Boost Merchant Guild was waiting at the back door. When he saw Phoebe and Han Shuo appear, he hurriedly moved aside to let the two in. "Thank you for your hard work," Phoebe said to the old man and glanced at Han Shuo, walking quickly into the Boost Merchant Guild. Han Shuo followed closely behind Phoebe, also moving quickly. Most of the people in the guild are Grover's people. I can only mobilize a few old men, and this is all because Grover doesn't know of my relationship with them. There are many guards inside, so we must be careful. Otherwise, if we're discovered, not only will the assassination fail, but it may even be difficult for us to leave alive. Phoebe was extremely familiar with the Boost Merchant Guild. When she brought Han Shuo along quickly, they avoided quite a few guards and didn't forget to remind Han Shuo repeatedly. The sky was now completely dark. There was no moon tonight, and the thick black clouds in the sky blocked out all light. Some of the lights in the corridors of the Boost Merchant Guild couldn't shine too far. Phoebe lived up to her strength as a sword master all right. Her nimble body surprised Han Shuo greatly. Her body was silent as she darted about, and her speed was very fast. After Han Shuo had calmed down, his extraordinary facial features surprised Han Shuo. The dark of the night couldn't obstruct Han Shuo's vision at all. Even without the illumination of the lights, Han Shuo could clearly see the fish swimming in the pond under the fake mountain in the distance. The footsteps coming from far away and the low murmurs in some rooms were all clearly audible to Han Shuo. Han Shuo's calmed movements were also incomparably nimble, like a cheetah searching for prey. He didn't make a single sound as he silently followed behind Phoebe. Suddenly, Han Shuo quickly closed in and grabbed Phoebe. He brought Phoebe's body and suddenly squeezed into a crack in a nearby fake mountain. The crack in the fake mountain was very narrow, and when the two squeezed in, their chests pressed tightly against each other. Han Shuo could feel the ample bosom of Phoebe. Phoebe's pretty face was enraged as she glared fiercely at Han Shuo, her eyes looking like they were about to spit fire. Han Shuo raised his index finger and made a shushing gesture. His eyes darted around, indicating that something was wrong with Phoebe. The anger on Phoebe's face hadn't disappeared even after Han Shuo's actions. A trace of bashful red spread across Phoebe's slender, fair neck. Now that the two's thighs were pressed against each other and their chests were pressed against each other, they could even feel each other's heartbeat. An ambiguous atmosphere instantly spread and rippled. As if she didn't dare look at Han Shuo again, Phoebe pressed her cheek against Han Shuo's ear and said in an extremely low voice, "If there's nothing wrong, I'll kill you." Han Shuo's face turned bitter, but he calmed himself and didn't say anything. When he felt extremely light footsteps approaching, he couldn't help but slow his breathing. He even shook his head slightly, wanting to warn Phoebe, who knew that because Phoebe's jade lips were moving closer to Han Shuo's shake of his head actually caused Phoebe's fragrant lips to directly press against Han Shuo's cheek. Just as Phoebe's breathing was unsteady and she was a bit angry from embarrassment, Han Shuo had already turned his head with difficulty and used a resolute gaze to signal Phoebe to be careful. Phoebe had the cultivation of a sword master after all, and her mental fortitude wasn't weak. At this critical moment, she only took a deep breath and her rapid heartbeat immediately calmed down. However, because she took a deep breath, her ample breasts involuntarily puffed up, causing Han Shuo to almost moan uncontrollably. My wind barrier clearly sensed movement, and I rushed here as fast as I could. Why didn't I discover anything? Is it because I've been too careful lately? A man's voice muttered to himself in a low voice not far from the two of them. After this voice appeared, extremely light footsteps slowly rang out in the surroundings. If it wasn't for the fact that Phoebe's attention was at its highest and that this person was extremely close to them, it would have been very difficult for her to hear these footsteps. Since he was a wind mage, if he used wind magic, he could indeed greatly reduce the weight of his body. His walking speed would be faster than that of an ordinary mage or warrior, and his footsteps would be lighter and more silent. It was no wonder that even with Phoebe's strength as a swordmaster, she could only detect movement when he got close. As Han Shuo and Phoebe were on tenterhooks, this person patrolled the surroundings once before quietly leaving. However, this time, Phoebe didn't dare to act rashly. She was afraid that her judgment would be wrong. She glared fiercely at Han Shuo, as if trying to find clues from Han Shuo's face. After a while, Han Shuo exhaled lightly and said in a low voice, "He's gone." Phoebe used both her hands and feet to forcefully squeeze out from the cracks in the fake mountain after he'd spoken. She lowered her head and said softly, "I'll let it go this time. Next time something like this happens, find me a wider place or I won't let you go." Phoebe circled around the area after she'd spoken and hurried in another direction. When she saw that Han Shuo wasn't following her with a wry smile, she couldn't help but put her hands on her hips and scolded softly, "You don't want the black gold or any more?" "Coming." Han Shuo responded and followed a bit helplessly, thinking to himself, "Where am I going to find a wide hiding place for you at a critical moment?" They didn't run into any more unexpected incidents after that. Phoebe led Han Shuo around a path and avoided a few waves of guards before finally entering Darnell and Yuna's room. "Let's make some preparations and wait for these B***cheese to return," Phoebe immediately said through gritted teeth as soon as they entered the room, as if she wanted to vent all of her anger from just now on Darnell and Yuna. And so, Han Shuo and Phoebe began to get busy, preparing to assassinate Grover's two loyal lackeys who were about to return. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.